Yes, he sensitized me so much and almost traumatized me. My level of stress has gone up and is now in an allostatic overload. And I hope it doesn't express itself through my DNA at this point and hasn't changed my DNA. Thank you, Jaime, for this wonderful play. And this was jokingly, but there are many aspects of the presentation of Jaime that you will see and project within what I'm going to give you for a few moments, which were left to me. When I give lectures on what happened in the Shoah, in that very specific element, which was a culture and the relationship of culture, memory, and the Shoah, I try not to give the same presentation each time, because in my own mind, I don't want it to become a cliche. That's one thing. On the other hand, I always start my presentations with about the same expression of a remark that was made in a conference in Berlin by one of the participants in this conference on the Shoah and Theresienstadt or Theresien, which is one of the elements I have been studying. And here it comes. The material that is on our work table is more worth than gold and platinum. It are the ashes of murdered and burned Jews. Because one of those presentations by a very, very organized German participant was about statistics and about numbers and about, a very objective one. And this came in. And he went on. Concentration camps in which Jews were interned and murdered are immense Jewish cemeteries. And in cemeteries, there is no place to enjoy art. Neither is it a matter, in fact, to enjoy scientific research or even the study of art. So I do put that first, which relativizes everything I'm going to do. I'm going to talk to you in the very beginning first, before I go back to people that have been writing about it within the concentration camps, within Theresien, and not only at the level of music. I want to talk to you about the relationship between culture and memory. And culture and memory has always been and is an essential, fundamental one for what we are going to say. One does not have to be an anthropologist to know that culture was born the day that human beings became conscious of their mortality. Meaning originates from the presence of closure. Culture is a means of domesticating closure. The burial sites, first major gesture of culture, are the roads, or were the roads at that point, to memory. Memory in which the beyond is questioned. And if I may take it one step further, I would say that works of art, ultimate products of culture, are, as Albert Camus, the French author, puts it, I'm quoting him, each piece of art is a victory over death. Works of art are also the basis, for me, of long memory. The Greeks knew this. Greek mythology knew this. Mnemosyne, the wife of Zeus, was not only the goddess of history, she was the goddess of memory. And I come back in part to what was said yesterday by Naomi at the dinner. Mnemosyne had 7 daughters. These daughters were the muses. So the muses are the children of memory. And the muses recreate the appearance of the world. The birth and source of humanity. They inspire the arts. The muses give the poet the secret of time beyond time. Claude Lanzmann, the author of the film Shoah, wrote, I quote, "Horror is only accessible through aesthetic means or through silence." End of quote. Hannah Arendt concurred when she said that only, quote, terrified imagination permits us to apprehend the atrocity of the Nazi crimes. And I'm saying terrified imagination. Philosopher Emmanuel Levinas, whom I have studied a lot, when made aware of that incredible text by Zelikovitz, 20 pages, which was attributed to Yossel Rakover, a so-called survivor of the Warsaw Ghetto's revolt, now 70 years old. And when we were made aware that this was a fake, written after the war, Emmanuel Levinas said about this, I quote, "It is truer than true." I just read a beautiful, true text, true as only fiction can be. Art is the matrix of long memory because it is beyond language and its referential structures, because it reorganizes what is in excess. And because of that, it has the virtue to make us understand what we cannot understand, what we yet cannot explain. What happened in Auschwitz, what happened in Birkenau, Treblinka, Sobibor, Belzec, Chemno, Majdanek, exceeds the limits of what, in fact, one can clearly think about, can reflect about, can talk about. We all know when Primo Levi asked for some explaining to one of the guards in the concentration camp, he got the simple-witted but perfectly suited, certainly a profound answer. Quote, "Hier ist kein Warum." Here is no why. The act bypassed explaining, comprehension. My mentor and friend, Vladimir Jean-Jacques, the French philosopher, asked himself in a wonderful book, Le Pardon, Pardon, quote, what makes this an unconceivable crime? Jean-Jacques calls it ontological nastiness, a metaphysical crime. My colleague at Waterloo University, who's a great specialist of the Shoah, Robert Jan van Pelt, in discussion with Timothy Snyder, you know, the author of the famous book now, Bloodlands, Europe Between Hitler and Stalin, refuted the theory of Snyder, putting at the same level the anti-Semitism of Hitler and of Stalin and their murders. Hitler, he said to Snyder, was a cosmic anti-Semitism. What Nazism put at work was the negation to the right to live, the negation to the existence of humanity. The Jew did not have the right to be. The Shoah is an ethical fracture. And as a matter of fact, since then, something in human history, in our way of thinking, in our rapport with meaning, with the law, with otherness, other people, otherness, and for those that are religious, in their rapport with God, has fundamentally changed. Nothing since the Shoah has been the same. And even if we cannot explain the warum of this infinite crime, it is our moral obligation to reflect upon it. Nobody has said it better than Elie Wiesel. I quote, "To study is combat death, and to combat what is worse than death, forgetting." End of quote. This brings us back to the relationship between culture and memory, which brings us back to art, because the study of the Shoah should not be confined to statistics, to numbers, to the objective world and its analytical debate, to university rhetoric. Auschwitz will never be a university discourse. Mexican writer Carlos Fuentes said to me in 1999 at a conference on culture in the 21st century, that was given in Los Angeles. I was the guest there on a panel with two other people. One was Carlos Fuentes. The other one was Steven Spielberg. Not bad. Art, and Fuentes said, and I quote, "Art imagines the past, remembers the future." Benjamin Britten's War Requiem, which I just heard 2 months ago in Switzerland again, is based on poems by First World War poet William Owen, killed 1 week before November the 11th, 1918. Owen wrote, and I quote, "I am not concerned with poetry. My subject is war and the pity of war. The poetry is in the pity. All a poet can do is war." Art imagines the past, remembers the future, and that's what they did. That's what the people did when they were in the camps, and not only in Terezin. The musicians, the poets, the painters, the bearers of humanity and of civilization in places that stank of death, all created many mitzvahs rolled into one. Memorialization and therefore reaffirmation of the infinite value of the individual human life, and recording the infinite value of this as a historical evidence. Violinist Paul Kling in Terezin, and these are all survivors whom I have well known, Paul Kling said, I quote, "Thanks to music, I did not die morally." Violinist Jacques Strumza in Auschwitz, I quote, "Music permitted me to bear what was unbearable." This was art as an answer to death. This was art as pure courage. This was art regaining on the barking of the dogs and of the men that held the dogs. Thomas Mandel, who died only about 3 years ago now, wrote this extraordinary text. Often and sometimes with intensity, the question of the inmates being sidetracked from their destiny by the cultural program was discussed, as well as the contents of its programming was debated. As a prisoner of the so-called ghetto, I always maintained that the option of going on playing was the best one. Finally, one should note that musical creations were only part of the globally remarkable activities of what happened in those camps. These few pearls found in Satan's horn called the ghetto Terezin, that's where he was, are nevertheless the key of a culture which partial destruction has been a painful loss, but which reflects the power of human spirit when confronted with extermination. Another of the inmates, Willy Mahler. The mere fact that the artists and scientists continue to work encourages of others. They connect like a chain the reality of yesterday with that of today and of the future. This is written in the camp. This spiritual chain is meaning of life, and that is humanity. Those who create this chain know that not one individual, but all mankind is the meaning and the goal and reason of human life. So if Jews here in Terezin, in spite of their circumstances, set an example to create permanently valuable sections of this chain, they have served mankind and have proven worthy of passing this test of humanity and of being and of living on. All a poet can do is warn, said Owen. Warning we must. Because in our more and more violent society, the signals are on red. And Jaime just talked about that also. And by the way, Jaime, the film on the and I'm bringing a parenthesis. The little movie you showed and the remarks there. I thought there was so much anti-Semitism in the presentation of this year's what do you call it, the Oscars in Hollywood, and one should re-listen to what was being said at that point. There is and I'll give you another example. And excuse myself, I won't pronounce some words because I've never pronounced them. Mind you, you're on your movie, she pronounced them. So I said to myself, it's not too bad. It's the fuddle-duddle of Pierre Trudeau. And so I never pronounced them. So I won't pronounce them because I've made not to do that. There's a rock group in Greece. And it's of a punk tendency. And it is called Pogrom. Its hit song is called Auschwitz. The text is as explicit. F. Wiesenthal. F. Anne Frank. F. Abraham's tribe. Auschwitz, how much I love you. In the elections of last June in 2012, the group lost one of its musicians, bassist Artemios Matteopoulos. You know why? He was elected to parliament, where he is now one of the 18 very official, democratically chosen representatives of the Golden Dawn, Greece's neo-Nazi party. A simple example of why warning we must. Is one of too many examples, and this is not my purpose. My purpose is culture, art, memory in the camps. Armand Gatti, who came out of the camps, is a French director, was a great theater personality, and he tells the following two stories. One day, at the peril of his life, at the peril of their lives, Lithuanian Jews organized a show because they had decided that they resembled too much Walking Death. Their play comprised two words, two modulated words. I quote, I am, I was, I will be, unquote. And they succeeded in bringing to tears of laughter their co-prisoners. Theater as a cock-a-snook to death, digging into the biblical memory to create a theater play as a way of remembering, as a way of connecting, and as a way of laughing. Armand Gatti also told the following story. One day in 1943, a certain Ruben Nishkin, sentenced to 90 days of isolation, which was a real death sentence, and which he should not have survived, walked out of the cell, dazed, and when he appeared in the prison courtyard, he started dancing a Cossack dance. And at every leap, he would call out one of the letters of the alphabet. A, B, C, D. Armand Gatti said, quote, that day, the war was won, unquote. Memory of gesture, memory of what constitutes the building blocks of language, on the way language helps us to reflect about each other. At the beginning, there was the word. For a long time, I have been searching for a work of art that did more than illustrate, more than exploit the dramatic situation of the killer camps. And ultimately, I came across a number of works which were composed in the camps, but especially one work, which I call Das Ding an sich, the thing in itself, because it says everything about the camps, and he says it at so many levels that it is a masterwork. I should talk a little bit about what Terezin is about. Terezin was what we call a Durchgangslager. Yeah, Durchgangslager, but it was the road to two places, essentially. It was the road to first Treblinka and then Birkenau. A kind of Potemkin village, called a ghetto. And I have a little text about that from one of the rabbis within the camp. It was a garrison city, and I give only 2 words because, this could be a full lecture about what it was. But this garrison city was made for about 6,000 to 7,000 people. And in 1942, in September 42, 55,000 people were within that city, within that place. A total of 130 39,801 people went through Terezin. Of those, 86,934 died in the killer camps. But what is even more extraordinary, 33,430 people died in Terezin themselves. Only about 16,830 people survived. In that camp, and I'm quoting a text of the opera, sitting in the middle of nowhere, where the living can no longer laugh and the dying can no longer lament. It's part of the text of the Emperor of Atlantis. It's an absolutely extraordinary thing, a place, and we have. And what happened is that in that place, the people that were brought there because they were famous, and many of those artists were famous. People that had fought for the German Empire in the First World War. Very rich people, academics, and artists. And from June 1942 until the end of September 1944, when about 17,000 people were transferred to Auschwitz and to Birkenau, there happened an intense cultural life, an intense Kafkaean cultural life. But in 29 months, works could be performed that were not performed anymore in the rest of Europe, in the rest of Nazi Europe. In music, for example, you had music by Mendelssohn, by Mahler, by Schoenberg. This was the only place where lectures were given by inmates, where drawings were made, where music was performed, sometimes often in perverse situations. But it was not the only place. It was not the only place. Where we can talk about the Lagerkapelle in Buchenwald under Vladimir Lauda, and the 27 concerts that he held between August 1943 and December 34, 1944. And in Buchenwald, there was a theater group called Bohemia. And not to speak about the Czech musician group in Flossenburg, 3 musicians, an accordion, a violin, and a double bass. The instruments they found, they created units. Or those musicians in Mauthausen, the hymns composed in Sachsenhausen, Dachau, Neuengamme, Lichtenberg. But what I'm doing, of course, essentially, is to talk about Terezin and this incredible ghetto. But ghetto, not really. There was a gentleman called Klang. I don't have his first name. It's a gentleman called Klang. He was not religious. And one of the rabbis in Terezin told him what he had to write down before it was lost from memory. And this is the text. 1, said the rabbi, a person may leave and return to a Jewish ghetto. Likewise, an outsider can enter or leave it. In Terezin, no. 2, in the Jewish ghetto, there were many stores, or were stores in kiosks. Terezin is encircled by barbed wire. Nobody comes here to shop, and what is sold here for the ghetto crowns was taken from those who were deported. 3, there were schools in the ghetto. In Terezin, education is banned. There were schools, but, education was done in secrecy. 4, in the ghetto, the Sabbath was observed, as well as all religious holidays. In Terezin, no. In the ghetto, there was food and kosher. In Terezin, no. 6, in the ghetto, there was full family life. In Terezin, families were separated. 7, the courts in the ghetto functioned according to Talmudic law. In Terezin, according to the Gentile law. 8, in the ghetto, people were buried according to Jewish law. In Terezin, they were burned. 9, the ghetto had Jewish self-government. Terezin is run by the Germans. Conclusion? Terezin is a concentration camp. It's no ghetto. That was his introductory lesson. A few words about what they call the Freizeitgestaltung, that free time organization. First, it started in July 1942. The camp was started in December 1941. Between December 41 and July 42, instruments were a death sentence. Were not allowed to have an instrument or to play music. There was a few instruments around, and people did it in secret. And suddenly, of course, the Nazi rulers in the camp thought that it was a good way of publicity. It was their way of marketing the so-called ghetto. So that year, in July 42, Erich Weiner became the head of that. From December till the end, from December 42 till the end, it was under the direction of Ingenieur Zucker. It's a wonderful thing because I have a score which was given by Paul Kling to me, and it was owned by Ingenieur Zucker, and it came from somebody who was born in Antwerp, where I come from. So 1942, this organization worked, and how did it all start? How did this all start? Alfred Cantor, who became later a renowned artist in Central Europe, lived in the barracks with what we called in the beginning, December 1941, the Labor Ghetto Establishing Team. By his evidence, the famous Zwenk was a comic, composed his first cabaret show while peeling potatoes. I feel ashamed, wrote Cantor, that I am missing Zwenk more than my perished family. So, from the very early days, lectures were given, and I'm not going to get into that at that point because we don't have enough time. Lectures were given, theater plays were started, and they became part of that culture and of the tissue of what Terezin was about. And it responds to part of what the coping is of what Jaime just told you. I could tell you that I have examples here that every day between 7 and 7 or at 7:30 for 1 hour, there were about 10 concerts, 7, 8, 10 speeches on all kinds of subjects. I will give you a few examples of that. There were also funny moments because laughing, and that's again part of the text of The Emperor of Atlantis, the famous opera of Victor Ullmann and Peter Keen. In the text of Peter Keen, a laugh who can laugh about itself is immortal. And I think it's one of the great, great sentences there. So there we go. There was another comic called Pepek Tausi. He was also a medical doctor, by the way. And he had decided to rewrite Zweig's story, the famous Zweig of Czechoslovakia, the good soldier Zweig. And this is a book about Czech resistance, and so and of his resistance to military force and to bureaucratic idiocy, and so he rewrote it in function of the camp. It was to be the story of an innocent Prague citizen who got into the wrong line when he went to pay his dog tax at the municipal offices. He had a J stamped on his identity card, and from then on, he had to swim along in the stream of Jews through all the misadventures of the Terezin ghetto. And that was the new story he wrote. Pepi Tausig wrote another story, and he was famous for his shortest lecture in the camp. News came into the camp. They knew about Stalingrad, for example. And he had immediately prepared a new show. And the show was this one. As many of you know, he began, I'm quoting him, on page such and such, Zweig says, and I'm quoting what he says about Zweig, it's easy to get in, but so hard to get out. That's real military art. And I do think our American friends should think about that from time to time also. I mean, everybody got the joke at once. There was a roar of laughter, and the lecture was over. There are other ones, this laughing at oneself. For example, there was a little newspaper made out of paper that people prepared themselves. It was called Shalom Napatek. Title, Sensational News. Today, June the 6th, 1943, there will be a very provocative lecture by the engineer Baron J. Hirsch, titled Cathode Tubes and Their Application Against Jews. Attendance is a deed of honor. And finally, there is another lecture. Which wine goes best with Viennese schnitzel? In preparation. No power on earth can kill you. The laughter that mocks itself is immortal. Peter Keen. I have to say a few words about the library. The library was an extraordinary thing. Suddenly the books arrived from all those libraries that were emptied by the Nazis. The libraries of private libraries, the remains of private libraries, the German Jewish libraries of Prague and Brno, the mobile library of the Prussian Society, the library of Jewish culture, of the Jewish Culture Union of Germany, library of the Institute of the Study of Judaica of Berlin. And these books would arrive, the books would arrive on cards, and the dead would be taken out on the same cards. And this I don't invent this. I mean, this was told by one of my survivors. I forgot the name, is gone for the moment. So, how many books? The organization was a perfect organization. At a given moment, there were 60,000 books in Terezin. 12,000 books disappeared. People kept them. They disappeared with the death. They disappeared with the people that went into the trains. But 60,000 books were available at a given moment, and there was a central library, and then there were other libraries. There was the children's library. There was the central medical library. There was a small technical library, a young Jewish library, and there were several readers' cycles. I won't talk about education. I can say a few words about the theater that was there. Major theater plays. The Marriage by Gogol. The Fatal Game of Love by a very famous director at that time, Karel Čapek. Molière's Georges Dandin. Buchner's Wojciech. Cocteau's Les Parents Terribles. Villon poems staged, and the music for those poems staged were by Victor Ullmann. Esther, biblical plays were given at that point, and it was a very rich theater life and intellectual life, but I must say that it was done with whatever they had at their disposal. the costumes for Esther, for example, were made out of linen bedsheets that the dead had left behind. The king was adorned with a chain made of empty paste cans. The tassels on the herald's clothing were made of shavings. I don't have to say much more about that. Because I want to get to creativity, and I think this is more important than anything else. I can talk about the lectures, and the 2,309 lectures were given in Terezin by 489 lecturers, speaking about coping. And it was on all kinds of subjects. Oh, 2 words about that, because it's too interesting. People like Leo Beck, Dr. Leo Beck, the chief rabbi of Germany, who was there. He did lectures on philosophy of the 18th and 19th century. Viktor Frankl, the psychologist and philosopher. Examples. On the 29th of February 1944, Hugo Friedman spoke about Austrian Rococo. Dr. Oskar Gotz, 17th of June 1944, music as a cultural factor. But he gave one 2 months later on the image of Shylock. Dr. Habermann, a series of skin diseases, tubercular tumors of the skin. Everybody had a specialty. People just went on or tried to hang on what they were doing before and what they were going to try to do afterwards. No, there were lectures like the principles of electromotors, the relationship between electricity and gas, speaking about the tragedies, speaking about lectures about memories of Liszt and von Bülow, errors as science of knowledge in mathematics. I mean, I'm passing, of course, 2,309 lectures. Never they spoke about death in those lectures. I want to talk, and I will try to finish on that, on 2 things. Poetry, because poetry goes beyond words. And poetry was very much part of the camps. Victor Ullmann himself was a poet. I'll give you a little one. Quote, "You who used the burning whip, forcing me in hell of dread, and the noble scripture's grip has no stone but just the dead. Never will you break my will, remain always in your hell, darkly you will feel the drill of the tamer poet's spell." Marvelous poem. This one is absolutely terrible. "My father, I am alone. The world is dead. The banner of the Antichrist, and God is far on his star." There is one I really want to read to you by Peter Keen. Peter Keen died at 27. He was a painter. He's one of the famous painters of Terezin. He was a poet. He wrote theater plays because there were lots of puppet plays also in Terezin. I will read one of them only. "O streets, dear streets, through rain, wind, and heat, we who haven't forgotten you, you give us courage anew. We will wander again like before with a happy step to Wales and to the Flanders. Take us singing with you to Strasbourg and to Brussels and to Mongolia. You are the key, you are what makes us free. Paris, Marseille, Antwerpen, one sees you draw close, jubilant, with green scarves of trees preceding you. with white milestones which draw you to the goal. For our tired legs, you are not too much. O streets, dear streets, with your fresh trot, without streets, anguish fills you. Come, 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 and come and get us away. So absolutely fabulous. Camille Hoffman, who was also one of the good speakers. He gave a series of talks. Here is his last poem, 1944. How do I give thanks that God created dreams? The only door through which you, my love, come to me at my heart's beckoning. What care I for the daily misery and pain? What care I for the restrictive walls of exile? The night alone promises me significance and purpose. You, my dearest, come to me through this quiet door. Last night, my heart missed the beat. You entered with wounded hands, pale from loneliness. My dearest, my child, see how great our suffering is. I threw myself at your feet, chagrined at your wounds, but already you had vanished through the secret door. Victor Ullmann was born in 1898, and I'm not going to give you anything of his background for the moment. He was a student of Schoenberg, and he was part of the very, very lively music world and theater world of Vienna first, and then of Prague after that. When he gets to the opera, which he composes from the summer 1943 on, and which he finishes somewhere in March in 1944, he composes this opera called The Emperor of Atlantis. And it has to do with a tyrant. He's the emperor. And with killing. Death is one of the characters. And death can't take it anymore. Because the killing has nothing to do with what natural death is about. So death goes on strike. Which was a theme that was very much used by Karel Čapek, by the way, the one I mentioned a few minutes ago. And so goes on strike. And then the world just doesn't evolve anymore the way the emperor wants. And it does happen that he starts to understand, and that he's the first one to go through the mirror, and that is what the opera is about. But this opera is not about. This opera is about the concentration camp. This opera is the relationship between murder and death. This opera is between the world of the human beings, and then this institution that has taken over. The text is both by Ullmann and by Peter Keen. And just 2 or 3 quotes, because I want to show you the poetry. And this is a poetry that goes so much further than any memory, in fact. Look, the world is full of light and color. It is true there are words that are not hard and brutal. It is true there are regions that have not been laid to waste by shelling. And the little couple who fall in love say, to finish these 4 or 5 lines, death becomes a poet when united with love. I'm getting to some of the other texts, some of the other texts very soon. Now, what does he do? He creates an opera. He calls it a kind of opera. It's a Singspiel. It's Commedia dell'arte. It's opera as such. It's Berlin cabaret. It's a spiritual cantata. I've called it the Dark Age magic flute of enlightenment, the Dark Age magic flute. Because what he does, all these elements become symbolic. And that's where the strength lies. He will use 4 levels. 4 levels. We strangely resemble the reading or the analysis when one works on the Torah. The literal meaning, peruch. The moral symbolic meaning, drach. The allegoric meaning, the allusive meaning, remesh. And then the hidden meaning, the level of mystery which is behind it. And that's what I said in the very beginning. You know, the work of art, when it's a great work of art, bypasses and what is beyond. And he does that by giving elements, musical elements to the emperor, musical elements to death, and to the human beings that are in between those 2 forces. But what he does also, he says farewell to the world, the bygone worlds, not to quote Stefan Zweig. He will use, at right moments, some elements of Dvorak, the Stabat Mater of Dvorak, the Requiem of Dvorak. He will use Haydn. Haydn? What is Haydn doing there? Well, Haydn has composed a quartet called The Emperor. Emperor. And it has to do, and in the Emperor quartet, in the slow movement, is... And that was, of course, the national anthem. And in that national anthem, where does it come from? Oh, well, it comes from Croatian folklore. Haydn didn't know what that was. This is inverse projection, of course. He will use it. He will use it when the emperor comes in. He modulates it so that the soldiers that are keeping the doors of the so-called presentation of this opera, or what would become the presentation of this opera, because it has never been presented. It is so they would not understand. The people in Terezin were all knowledgeable, very knowledgeable. This was a university on the abyss. And so he puts in Haydn, he puts in Mahler. The farewell in Das Lied von der Erde comes in. Bach will come in. And so he plays around on all that, but he goes much further, and I can give you those elements that are these symbolic elements. You know, he had 13 musicians to work with. 13 musicians with one conductor is 14 musicians. 2 times 7. The farewell scene of the emperor is 7 times 7 measures. 7 times 7. The number 7 comes in. The opera, when you look well at the opera, from the musical point of view, is in 3 parts. 6 scenes, 6 scenes, 6 scenes. 6, 6, 6 is the figure of the apocalypse. But it is also 18, it's renewal. All these elements are playing along, and this opera is so much more than a very simple opera. I will give you now a 1 or 2 examples of the opera, and I will read you at the same time what it says, because this is important, and I think I will stop after that. I'll give you one more little reading after that. We will not go to, as I thought, we will not do all the elements. We will start with the 2 last ones, 25, 26, 27. And we will stop somewhere, because I don't want to do the whole thing. This is death. And death says, I am death, death the gardener, who sows sleep in painful furrows. I am death, death the gardener, who plucks weary creatures like faded weeds. I am death, Death the gardener who reaps the ripe corn of suffering in the fields. I am the one who delivers you from pestilency. I am not pestilency. I am the one who releases you from suffering. I am not the cause of suffering. I am the comfortable, warm nest to which a tormented life flies. I am the greatest celebration of freedom. I am the ultimate lullaby. My welcoming abode is calm and peaceful. Come, rest a while. The war is over. It's an extraordinary text in my translation from the original German.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, it's 12:32.
Yes.
Irving and Bella must start on time.
He must start on time. So you won't hear it, but I want to finish with one thing. So you won't hear any excerpt, so that's okay. Just before he was sent to Auschwitz, Ullmann wrote the following text. And I usually end with that, and I want to end with that. Goethe's saying, live the present moment, live eternity, always represented for me the enigmatic meaning of art. Theresienstadt was, and is still for me, the school of form. Before that, when we did not feel the impact nor the burden of material life because they were erased by comfort, that magical accomplishment of civilization, it was easy to conceive artistic forms of great beauty. It is here in Terezin, when in our daily existence we had to vanquish matter with the help of the power of form, when everything that was related to the muses contrasted extraordinarily with the environment which was ours, that was the true school of mastery. Like Schiller, we try to penetrate the secret of each work of art in an attempt to annihilate matter through form, which is the supreme mission of human being, the aesthetic one as well as the ethical one. I composed in Terezin a certain quantity of music, principally to satisfy the needs of conductors, directors, pianists and singers, and through them of the members of the free time organization of the ghetto. To make up its catalogue would be as vain as to stress the fact that playing piano in Theresienstadt was absolutely impossible as long as the camp was deprived of instruments. It would be equally as futile for the identification of future generations to evoke the cruel lack of music paper. One has to stress, nevertheless, that Terezin contributed to emphasize and did not hinder my musical activities, that in no way whatsoever we sat down to weep on the banks of the waters of Babylon. And that our effort to serve the arts respectfully was proportionate to our will to live. In spite of everything, I'm convinced that those who fight in life as well as in the arts to triumph over matter which always resists will share my point of view.